I want to ask something of you. Leave the stream. No, I'm not joking. This stream will involve something that I would call politics, I think. And that's the last thing I want to do, is make this stream feel like a requirement for anyone to have to watch. However, if you do stay, I have some pretty important things to cover. An overview of PlayStation's stance, a quick look into digital rights for games, and my perspective plus proposition for how this situation could be handled. I probably am not going to read this exact word for word because I do not sure. Anyways, before we continue, I read to you the announcement exactly as PlayStation published it. I suppose I should read it on here. So, as consumer preferences and the broader entertainment industry continue to shift away from physical discs to digital, physical game disc production for all new games releasing on PlayStation consoles will be discontinued starting January 2028. Following this date, new games will be available on PlayStation Store and at retailers in digital formats only. This transition has no impact on games that already released or will be releasing prior to January 2028 in disc format. This is a natural direction for Sony Interactive Entertainment to adapt to consumer trends as the general preference for digital media significantly outpaces physical discs. This transition will enable us to align more closely with how most of our community prefers to access and play games today. We'll continue to prioritize our resources to drive innovation in how players can access games and provide choices as to where players prefer to purchase new games, and rather that at retailers or PlayStation Store, we remain committed to delivering a world-class gaming experience to our fans, and we thank you for your continued support. For important updates on PlayStation Store for PS3 and PS Vita announced today, please click here. That's at the bottom. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Okay, I just want you to know this impacts me. So reading this isn't easy. Let's move on to a few comments I'd like to highlight. Then I'll go on to the digital rights part of this. I'd like to say before we get started, I learned a lot from these, and in fact, I should also point you to the bottom of the announcement regarding PS3 and Vita. That announcement entails both shutting down relatively soon and both shutting down. Okay, that sentence does not read very well. Okay, so that announcement entails both the PS3 and Vita's storefronts shutting down relatively soon. With that out of the way, let's view the comments. So from the Max 37, now I'm not going to really show them physically on screen because I haven't written down, but and I don't know exactly where they are. I hope that's all right. But the Max 37 said, for a lot of people, selling their games was the main way for getting new games. Spin-54 announcing this the same day you're announcing the end of the PS3 and Vita stores is the biggest load I've ever heard. You're putting a finite existence on gaming, subject to the whims and maintenance of a single corporate entity. Taylor K93. In the same week as Sony removing access to purchased films from people's libraries, I just want to put it out there. This was true. I didn't even know about this. Sony is removing hundreds of purchased movies and TV shows from PlayStation's libraries starting September 1st, 2026, due to expired licensing agreements with Studio Canal. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Users will not receive refunds or compensation for the lost content. All right. And then another comment. Sorry, my voice, but KYA 797. Well, if you want people to stop buying new game systems, this is a choice, I guess, but this will mean I will never buy another PlayStation, as the way digital purchases are handled have shown me that it's a risk to pay a single penny for a digital game, as one glitch on Sony's part can get your account banned and make you lose out on every digital purchase you ever made. I was lucky enough to experience this firsthand and was locked from using any of my content for over a month till I finally escalated to a high enough level to fix it. But that experience is why I will never embrace digital only, unless they're doing digital only with no DRM. And we know that ain't happening. Isn't happening. That's what they said, but anyways, I'm trying to be respectful. So I guess my PS5 is my last Sony console, unless this decision is changed. Getting a little worked up about that one. After going through these comments, I naturally did a little searching to see what would come up and wrote the following thoughts down. Thanks to an article I read on Screen Rant by Kyle Gratton, I found out that many countries are to follow suits, that being lawsuits. Only a few have gotten very far into it, but if Sony does not change course, they might find themselves paying more money than they anticipated from this decision. And honestly, I don't blame people for coining terms like Sony tax, as Sony quite literally not only gets a gaming monopoly, but can also charge whatever they want. I mean, many people were already priced out of PlayStation consoles, but this really puts the nail on the coffin, as many just simply can't afford the raise in price of internal storage or even own enough games to justify spending multiple hundreds of dollars on a console, with the fear that Sony can ban them or remove their games at any time. Couple this with not being able to trade, sell, or lend your games, and top that off with both movies getting removed from accounts and the PS3 and Vita closing, PlayStation is making its mark as the cautionary tale of how not to handle an all-digital future, and certainly not the right way to handle digital games rights or data. How to handle digital gamers' rights or data. I'm sorry. I've thought about this future for most of my life. I just never thought it would be so direct like this. I guess time will tell if consumers will finally get rights equal to those distributing games, and no compensation was given for all the money people spent on the movies delisted. Sony made these choices knowing perfectly well that people funded them, and they still couldn't care less about the impact they made on so many people's lives. So much so, they stated caution after the fact rather than when they set the date in motion. I mean, it's obvious they should have knew they couldn't offer compensation or support their paying customers, and that makes this decision even worse. I slightly edited some of that from when I first originally made it, but that's obvious that, it being a script and everything. Anyways, let me continue on. Maybe take a little pause in between. Drink some water. I get a little worked up about this, like I said, and I'm feeling better about reading it, but I don't know if I like the fact that I am, because I don't like doing these kind of things. If I'm being honest, I really don't want to give people advice on how to handle this situation, and I'm And no, I'm not talking from Sony's position. I mean our position as players and consumers. They don't just make a little mistake, they quite literally shattered the pre-established trust they put in me as a PS5 purchaser. I supported this system because some of my favorite games were going to be on it and nothing else. Trusted in their word that physical gaming meant something to their ecosystem and that they were innovating on it. The last thing I expected was to wait multiple years for games to release, to then be hit by them stating that physical games were temporary on my PS5, not just PS6. Heck, I remember my first big purchase being a PS2. So yeah, I've supported PlayStation for years, maybe not exclusively, but I do own almost every PlayStation generation. And I'm sad to say that if they don't change their strategy, I will have no interest in owning an all-digital console. So no less paying for it. I'm not sure I would ever bother with it if they gave it to me. I mean, I can't imagine. The store would be... The storage, I think is what I was trying to say. I can't imagine the storage would be any cheaper. And I ain't streaming my games either, especially not via console if they could be streamed on a TV. To be honest, I just want them to release more physical games. I'm interested in it on PlayStation 5 before stopping production and never making new physical games again. Look, we need some protections in place so big companies like this can't just upend their commitment to an entire product and only halfway support it, or even mention the possibility of changing their terms in the middle of their generation. I did not buy the original PS5, yes, the original, with the prospect that discs would stop being released during its life cycle, nor that some of the games I saw during its release would be delayed to the point that I would question if they too would be impacted by this. This is a disrespectful pull of the rug under my feet as a customer, and it feels like a deceptive marketing just to turn a few extra bucks. I don't care how late into its life cycle it is. This system promised more than it delivered before I bought it, and made no attempt to even indicate that physical discs would stop being made for games. It promised way before this date, but now, with longer development cycles, I should not invest in a platform. I should not invest in a platform, then later be informed that the platform is going to change what I bought after I bought it. Like, why should I buy a new system if they already have ways to play the games I'm interested in, or if I already have ways to play the games I'm interested in? I have no idea at the time. I had no idea at that time. Many of their games were going to remain exclusive to... Oh, wait. I had no idea at the time. At the time, many games were going to remain exclusive to the system, too. I need to reword that. So, at that time, I was aware that many games were going to remain exclusive to that system, which... No, I think I read that wrong. I had no idea at the time that many of their games weren't going to remain exclusive to the system, which isn't a bad thing, but it just goes to show that they will take advantage if it gives them a better market position, which I partially feel is what they could be doing now with telling us this and offering a partial explanation on their plans. It also proves they're willing to change their mind, but only after consoles have been out for a while. I mean, they say 2028 discs will stop, but they don't really say what incentive people will have to buy a box with a code in it from the store. If they have something else planned, then they ought to outright say it. It isn't on us to... It isn't... How do I say it? It's... Instead of making us guess what they are planning, as players, we've been patient and given them our money for years without a lot of their promises happening like they originally intended. We gave them the benefit of the doubt more than they are giving us anything. They're just taking from us at this point and calling it a service that we should not only accept but pay for. One way, I'll take a little bit of a break in between this. One way I'd sum it up is, if a company is going to stop producing physical games for a console, that decision should apply to an entire generation, not be introduced midway throughout it. More importantly, consumers should be told before the first system is sold. Consumers should be told before the first system is sold. People who bought the disc PS5 did so knowing physical games were part of the platform. Changing that expectation after the hardware is already in millions of homes is unfair. Make the next generation digital only if that is your direction that you want, but don't change the format halfway through the current one. Or midway. Should have wrote. Anyways, not like half, but you get the point. I'm not trying to place a specific time there. It's not over, so... Anyways, back to the script. Look, I play games on more systems than PlayStation. Typo, but kind of funny. So, my views may be biased to PC or physical alternatives. Given this and how it's closely related to digital rights for gaming, I think it's only natural that we take a look into what they are. The biggest and most well-known digital right in gaming is licenses versus ownership. Digital games are typically licenses more often than not. Will last until the platform stops being supported. More often than not, and will last until the platform stops being supported. After that date, these games may become unplayable, and even worse, this could happen before the platform stops receiving support, which is pretty close to the case discussed earlier with the large backlog of movies being delisted from Sony's platform with no compensation for the loss to users. So much to say, you don't own the game in any meaningful way. Like I stated before, you cannot resell it, even if they could offer a digital way to do so, nor can you trade it in or get credit towards a new game, which was far more common than I expected, and the comments of the blog post really announced this. A physical game does not have to be perfect to provide rights that digital games often do not, even if it needs a patch. I could still trade or lend the disc without giving someone access to my account. A digital license usually turns the purchase into a personal, non-transferable permission. An argument that sometimes gets thrown around or against physical media is pirating and distribution. But I would like to at least give an interesting perspective to think about. I don't want to say everything about it because I do want to be, respectful of it, but I think there's something that needs to be pointed out here. A physical disc can be copied in the same way that a digital game can be copied, but neither copy is automatically playable. Modern consoles rely on encryption, signed software, and license checks, not simply on whether the game arrived on a disc. Removing the disc does not remove the underlying piracy problem. It mainly removes a legitimate distribution and ownership option. Personally, for me to feel like Sony is making good faith on the situation, they would need to change their approach and maybe even follow with a new stance, such as keep genuine physical editions available for PS5 games released during the PS5 support period. If a disc is impossible, say so clearly before launch. Don't call a download code in a box a physical game, and don't make customers discover after buying the console that the format they paid to support is being phased out. But even if they don't change their stance on physical games, they still need to change their stance on digital ones. A few starting points might include, I'm not saying Sony can never go all digital. I'm saying it should be disclosed before consumers buy the hardware. If physical PS5 games may stop while Sony is still selling and supporting the PS5, That information should have been on the box, in the advertising, and in purchase terms from day one. People who bought the disc models should not discover midway through the generation that physical releases were only temporary and clearly labeled. So, if publishers call something a physical game or a physical edition, consumers should be told whether the game is fully playable from disc, whether a download is required, whether online activation is mandatory, and what happens if the servers or storefront close. Food products have standardized disclosure requirements because consumers need material information before buying them, in the US at least. Video games do not yet have an equivalent, widely applicable disclosure standard for digital ownership. Online dependencies, server shutdowns, or rather so-called physical editions actually contain a playable game. If a purchased digital game is permanently removed from a sale or could no longer be downloaded, consumers should have a meaningful remedy that could include the ability to transfer the license to another compatible platform, download an archival copy, or receive a reasonable substitute of comparable value. If transfer is technically impossible, a preservation right should eventually apply, perhaps after 4 or 5 years without commercial availability or support. This should cover the base game, purchase DLC, expansions, patches, and other digital content. Preservation should not necessarily mean that people can commercially exploit the game. It would be intended to protect legitimate access, research, and cultural preservation. When an online game is being discontinued, the operator should provide reasonable advance notice and make practical alternatives available, or possible. I suppose, yeah, possible is a better word here. So let me just read that sentence again, because it is important. When an online game is being discontinued, the operator should provide reasonable advance notice and make practical alternatives possible. Depending on the game, that could include releasing server software, enabling private or player-hosted servers, transferring operation to another company, or supporting a community-run successor. Not every game can be preserved in exactly the same way, but permanent loss should not automatically be the standard or default. Paid unspent digital currency should also receive protection. If a service closes or the currency becomes unusable, consumers should receive a refund, account credit, or a replacement of equivalent value where technically feasible. The balance should be transferable to another supported service or platform. The value should be based on what the consumer paid, including an applicable discount, rather than on an arbitrary reduced rates at the time of closure. Account bans should require some legal guidance and not be under full discretion of the company, at least in cases where the account is tied to digital goods and loss thereof. There should be measurable protections to keep the companies from restricting access when otherwise unfair or unreasonable, or without at least offering offline support. Finally, companies should provide both advance notice and a clear explanation of the consequences. A vague statement that a service is changing or being retired is not sufficient. Consumers should be told exactly how the change affects downloads, purchased content, DLC saves, multiplayer subscriptions, refunds, account access, hardware compatibility, and any remaining digital currency. Notice should be designed to inform people, not merely to pressure them into buying more products before access is restricted. I will provide these along with any links and additional suggestions I have in the VOD's description. Physical media can preserve some rights, while digital rights protections can preserve others. The goal should not be to force everyone to use discs. It should be to ensure that whichever format people choose, they understand what they're buying and retain reasonable access to it. Digital rights are about what happens after the purchase. Whether access can be removed by a ban, whether a storefront can disappear, whether a community can be lost, whether a game can be preserved, and whether consumers still have meaningful alternatives. These choices can affect people, businesses, and communities, not just how a game gets installed. If you are in the US and are considering doing something, perhaps you could bring these issues to your federal and state representative ask for rules covering digital ownership, disclosures, delisting, server shutdowns, refunds, portability, and preservation. The Federal Trade Commission, appropriate for potential deceptive claims such as calling something owned or physical when it's only a non-transferable license or download code. The FTC has handled video game consumer protection matters, including misleading billing and advertising. Your state attorney general or consumer protection office. This is often more direct, relevant to misleading advertising or unfair sales practices under state law. There's a few more, but just give me a second. I have to drink something. State legislatives. So, it's talking about California's AB 2426, I think it says here. For example, addresses disclosure with digital goods are marketed with words such as buy or own. It does not create perpetual access or require companies to keep servers online forever. Other states have considered related digital goods and preservation proposals. So that's a little bit of information for you. Organizations working on preservation and digital ownership. Groups such as Video Game History Foundation, Software Preservation Network, and Stop Killing Games can help turn individual concerns into documented policy proposals. If you are outside the U.S., you should generally look for your National Consumer Protection Agency, a regional consumer protection network, your national legislator or relevant ministry, competition authorities where platform control or anti-competitive conduct is involved, EU institutions or national consumer authorities if they are in the European Union. Okay, one thing before I get back to the script. Can't remember. I'm getting confused. So it's something to do with like, these are suggestions for you to look more into. These aren't like 100% you can do exactly what I say, but just kind of like look more into these things. These are like ways for you to think about it and things for you to be aware of that you can look into. So I just want to make it clear, this is like a call for you to look into them yourself, not me trying to direct you to do a specific one of these. Just like if you feel the need to, these are there, and I want to make it clear that these are things you can do. Anyways, I'm going to get back to the script. The things I just listed are the things that can make a big impact. If you want, you can take it a step further by doing things like avoid impulse buying digital games, especially games you may never play. If you genuinely want a game and a physical edition is available, choose physical when the price and format work for you. The point is not to pressure yourself or others into buying discs they do not want. It's to avoid treating digital purchases as the default. Less effective, but still a way to push for better conditions, is to wait until a game releases instead of pre-ordering it. Basically, anything you can do to make it harder for them to predict your interest. This one isn't exclusive to physical either. Digital players can wait until a release and then buy. It also sends a strong message that pre-ordering is no longer meaningful compared to physical editions. I mean, on digital, you can literally buy the game the second it releases if you want it. If anything, it's probably a stronger message for digital games than for physical. I'm going to end this stream with a few clarifications on my past stream. First, I'll probably delete or cut out some of my absent stream due to my stance on this matter, my points here, so I'll unlist it depending on how things go. I also noticed multiple statements being thrown around, and I would like to say this. If you impose an all-digital PlayStation generation, don't harass developers, quote tweet employees, or waste hours arguing online. Make your position visible where companies measure it. Avoid pre-ordering digital-only releases, and do not treat waiting until the last minute as a meaningful alternative if you still want to send money before launch. If you want to support the game, consider buying it on release day or waiting until reviews and real-world information are available. Support games that offer genuine disc editions, submit clear feedback to Sony and publishers, and contact consumer protection officials when the issue involves misleading physical products or loss of access. Like, for instance, that one person that talked about their account getting banned. That could potentially be a thing that could be brought up. You know, and it's good to make a document of those things. Anyways, don't just make noise. Create a business signal, a consumer record, or a regulatory record. Ask for specific alternatives, not just bring back physical. Ask for real discs, offline play, transferable licenses, clear delisting policies, meaningful disclosure about what discs contain, and long-term access after storefronts or servers close. Oh, and I'm aware of the boycott going on during this week. I've decided to play my disc version of Marvel's Spider-Man in place of the remastered version. I realize the boycott says nothing PlayStation at all, but some people are also choosing to play discs offline, which is my choice during this week. I'd like to end saying one last thing. Don't sell a disc-based generation first and decide later that physical releases are no longer part of the plan. Choose the format before launch, disclose it clearly, and let consumers decide whether they want to participate. This is Draco Meter, signing off. I wish you all luck with the fight for physical media. I hope the stream Become VOD can help a few people find it easier to do so. I'm also sorry for the whole politics thing again. I'm not really big on talking about it during stream myself, as I like to mostly listen to both sides. However, this problem hit home, and it doesn't feel like there are many sides.